Dobrze, to ja powoli jeszcze tak organizacyjnie coś opowiadam. Ja nazywam się Magda Cielecka, a bardzo się cieszę, że mogę tutaj być i moderować panel, który jest pierwszym z 4, jak zapewne wiecie, i będzie traktować o tym, dlaczego gramy, w co gramy. Zaraz przedstawię naszych panelistów. Oni też będą mieli 5 minut na zaprezentowanie siebie, tego, co ich fascynuje w grach. Będę starała się trzymać właśnie tego, żeby to było 5 minut. Myślę, że w drugiej części tego panelu będzie miejsce na pytania, natomiast jeżeli w trakcie mielibyście jakieś, to śmiało podnoście ręce i postaram się to uwzględnić. I myślę, że chwilowo to będzie wszystko. Ja sobie już usiądę. Wszystko dobrze słychać? Nie ma problemów technicznych. Możemy zaraz zaczynać. Tutaj mam mierzenie czasu.
If no, I believe everything works.
Dobrze, to może tak.
Time watch is on. How about starting from my left-hand side? We've got with us Peter Dürsch, Tomasz Majkowski and Matthias Fuchs. They're all academics, game theoreticians, and I believe that they will present their points much better than I can do it. A simple question for a start. You'd like to start with your presentation, wouldn't you?
Zostałeś wybrany.
You were chosen. You're the chosen one.
Wait a second. You need a microphone. So, we can translate it. Czy ja nie zasłaniam, bo mogłabym się też zwinąć.
Sit too much in the picture?
Guten Morgen, danke schön, dass Sie hergekommen sind. Mein Name ist Matthias Fuchs, ich bin von der Universität Lüneburg.
Much for coming. My name is Matthias Fuchs. I'm working at Lüneburg University, where we run the gamification lab laboratory, and I'd like to share with you what this ludicity of our century is. When I started looking for a text that describes our century, I found 1751 text by Daniel Bernoulli, who wrote at the time we live in the century of play. And that was the 18th century. The century when we came to live will be described once as the century of play. That's what Bernoulli wrote in the middle of the 18th century. Why did it happen so?
Spiel,
At the time in Europe, something which couldn't be called the games madness started. Suddenly people got passionate about the games, and musicians began to compose using a variety of playful methods. Also, furniture designers made furniture for playing, and there were also society games, social games. Billiards became so popular, and many people would even arrange their own billiard rooms. Mozart, for one, when he died, they said that he had 2 things of value, grand piano and a billiard table. People spent a lot of money on that. Some would get themselves ruined, and Daniel Bernoulli wrote that throughout Europe you can see the tendency that play determines more strongly than any time before whatever we do in our life. Even people who resorted to religious practice would take play into the prey. Gerard Terstegen invented a lottery where a certain process of random choice had the congregation select the prayer of the day. No, people don't play. That's too boring. We must introduce an element of a play. Let's turn the prayer into play. Kirnberger, composer, CPE, Bach, Stadler, Haydn, and Mozart used methods of the play in their compositions. That took about 50 years, and it got suddenly through. Composers ceased to take interest in that, and the period of romanticism got in, so music was to result from ideology and from your personal circumstances and not from a throw of a dice. People organized game rooms, and there were also designers of furniture, for example the Röntgen family, who designed those gaming tables. They were the laptops of the 18th century, mobile, multifunctional, where you could play in a variety of games, but you could also store pornography or secret letters. There were plenty of hidden pockets, drawers, where you could put the love letters, even books and games. We see what the table looked like. You could unfold it and also build the floors for various games. There was a chessboard, and what was beautiful, it was beautiful that you could fold it, just like your laptop or PowerBook. You could take it for travel, and in Paris, Lisbon, Krakow or Vienna, you could open it and play. This European culture of the play made people to the like of Goethe or Mozart, when moving to a new city, they would socialize not through some academic meetings, but through the meetings of players, of gamers. Now I must stop the presentation of this table for reasons of short time. You can see it online how it worked, but also in how people behaved. This element of the game was strongly present. Here you see a typical silhouette of a famous gamer or player from the 18th century, and from the 21st century we see that there are quite many similarities. The hairdo, or rather the hairstyle, plenty of hair. You see that those ladies have time, they feel like playing, and they have certain attributes of the play. Jane McGonagall has her power book. She's got a pair of binoculars, which probably suggests that she's capable of looking into the future, or possibly also in the language behaviors of the 18th century. You could see this rococo gestures, gesticulation, hairstyle, but also how Mozart communicated. We see that he always said something like, "Ah, fuck all, I don't care." And the academics of the 21st century say similar things. Let's see what Ian Bogos says. This is a typical rococo talk. Gamification is bullshit. So this is not only the 21st century, that is the century of the game. Also in the 18th century there were plenty of similarities. What Doris Lessing said, she said, this century becomes every day more like the 18th century, full of thieves and adventurers, rogues and a robust, unhypocritical savagery, side by side with people lecturing others on morality. This is the comparison of the 18th and 21st centuries.
Dobrze, dziękuję ślicznie. Myślę, że...
Thank you very much. I believe that later we will be able to ask questions and discuss the ideas that have been presented. And now, Dr. Majkowski, can you please start with your presentation now? I have prepared some sort of presentation, but I'm a bit ashamed of showing it to you actually at the moment. You will see why. I just need a few seconds to prepare it. Yeah. Majkowski, that's me, correct. But it doesn't seem to be working. It doesn't matter really if it doesn't work. I don't really have to show it because whatever I wanted to show to you was just included in one slide. So perhaps there is no really need to show this single slide I have prepared. It was in Polish anyway. So I think I will be able to simply say roughly, briefly what I wanted to present. Basically, life is unbearable. The rules to life that we find overwhelming. We are very much limited by different rules. Life is not transparent, and life ends usually in a surprising way without any clear end result. So for this reason we are looking for some ways out, ways to escape. So with the different structures in life and rules, play or games show us a different world where things are different. And those who are not powerful enough get some power, and those who are powerful perhaps in life, they are simply deprived of this power. So this is a utopia of equality, perhaps. No matter who you are in real life, and in culture, then in game, when playing, you keep to certain rules, and then all become equal. And only later, once you start playing, nothing interesting there, so please, let's skip it, this slide. So once you start playing according to certain rules, certain changes occur, some social differences are introduced, and we see who is the best. Take into account how one plays, or how one was simply selected by fate, but not because of one's social standing, for instance, in real life. So this, in my view, is the reason why perhaps the lower you are in the social ladder, the fewer or the less power you have in your real life. When you are a child, for instance, then the more perhaps likely you are to play. And in this familiarities, certain principles of real life are distracted, certainly, certain manifestations, certain gestures are there that you take pleasure in, simply seeing that the world you know from outside the game very often falls apart in the game. The destruction of the scenery, for instance, in the video games, something that's quite infantile, perhaps. How shall I put it? Some believe that perhaps this very important aspect of game is not so important, but this is related to the fact that for many players we want to get rid of the unbearable world that is outside the game. Once we get rid of it, we can start building our own utopia, that we can create something, that we are in the center, that the rules are clear, and that we are able to achieve something, while in life we don't really know whether we are good at all or not. But certainly it's not possible to play always. The game has to come to an end sooner or later. That's good, perhaps, because we get a fresh look of our life outside the games, try to perhaps understand better those difficult to understand rules, and try to perhaps use some of your creativity in the game, the one that is only there in the game. Thank you.
Wyjątkowo dobre wyczucie czasu, równo 5 minut. Właściwie.
Excellent timing, I am impressed. Very good. And now the third presentation, yes, please.
Okay, ich bin Peter Dürsch und spielt.
Hello, I'm Peter Dürsch. I'm a game theorist, but I'm not going to make a theoretical lecture here in front of you, but I will say a few words about the theory of games. First, a few words why. A few real games, perhaps you are able to recognize some of these, perhaps some of you have played some of them. These are real, authentic games. And here, some game theory. Perhaps some of you are also familiar with this issue, although perhaps I am the only one who have seen this text before. The reason is, of course, that I am the author of this text. It's a technical issue. Well, I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but this is perhaps something very theoretic, not really easily accessible to the general public. The theory of games, why? Something very simple, it would seem, but then you see some strange formulas, some mathematics here. What is it all about? The reason is that game theory certainly is based on games, but then it developed moving away from games themselves. Where did it all start? Jocht von Neumann founded game theory. He was born in the then Austria-Hungary, emigrated to Germany, then to Austria. He had different names, he used different names in different countries. Jocht von Neumann was actually the last name he used in the States, so John von Neumann. He came up with text in starting in 1928, and then started with certain applications in economics since the 1950s. Application in economics are the sciences, mathematics, biology, sociology. People in all those different disciplines, they drew from his ideas, and then used his theory in those different disciplines. He was based in mathematics, he was a mathematician, but his theories are also reflected in other disciplines. The title now of his work, The Origins of Game Theory. It was on the theory of games, social games. He wrote that some of the games, they keep to certain rules, like card games, some other social games. He says that it's quite different with the games that children play in the street outside of their homes. And he writes here that the issue that I would like to refer to in this text is the following one. And in mathematical language, he starts defining his assumptions, his ideas. Players S1, S2, S3, they play in a given game so that a certain result is achieved. It is important here to achieve the most possible or the best possible result for a given player. The theory is not about designing games or classifying games or players. This theory of games is about the optimum way of how to play a given game. What kind of behaviors are the most desirable behavior of the players, what should be done and what should be the end result of the game. It all started with those different social games. What is important there is perhaps that there are certain typical features that you have to draw your attention to. So clearly defined rules in social games. And he says that it's possible to reduce those issues to numbers. And this is what mathematicians love, reducing things to numbers, digits. It is more difficult to study something that cannot be presented in numbers. Yesterday in the restaurant, if you say, I liked the food we had yesterday in the restaurant, but it's difficult to say, I liked it at the value of 20 or 150 or million. What would this mean actually about the food in the restaurant? It's difficult to do proper calculations here, but in many games, such calculations are possible. There are many games that contain certain numerical features. For instance, the fact that there's going to be a winner, it is possible, sometimes in a perfect way, to study such game theory. Now, the next issue, in the most desirable, the best way, it's not about what people can do if they do not stick to the rules. Game theory is the one that contains an optimistic vision of mankind. It's about how to play according to rules. If no mistakes are occurring, everyone plays in the optimum way, and everyone at the same time is an absolutely egoistic homo economicus. What does that mean, homo economicus? It's about people who actually are interested in their own ideas. They want to get their own high score, and they don't really care what the high score of the others is. Everyone wants to win, no matter what happens to the others. So this is the egoistic idea of homo economicus. What is also important is that homo economicus at the same time should be a mathematical genius. He or she should be able to solve any mathematical problem straight away without any difficulty, without any error. It's not realistic perhaps, but this assumption makes it possible for us to analyze the behavior of homo economicus in game theory. So homo economicus is interested in their own win, their own profit, and never does any errors, mathematical ones. What happened later? How did game theory move on? Usually students of economy, this is usually, at least in Heidelberg University, they also participate in a special course on game theory. It doesn't have much to do with what we perhaps like doing in our free time. Actually, there is a better name to game theory. It's about a theory of strategic interaction, you might say. This is what the course at the university is about. How people behave when they interact, take into account that they are all homo economicus. They are egoistic, behave according to this idea at the same time, so that they can also calculate very well. They're good at mathematics. So, for instance, when we speak about two companies, they operate in the market, one wants to take over another company, and whether the state should say yes or not. The game theory can be useful here. Or another idea, for instance, the European Central Bank and the behaviors of the bankers, whether credits can be given to banks and what the banks are going to do to get their hands on the available funds. This can also be analyzed from the perspective of game theory. So game theory certainly is based on games, but it has developed, and today the main objectives are quite different. Today, game theory is an elementary part of economy in general. It is believed that all economic players act according to this idea of homo economicus, that everyone can calculate, for instance, very well. I'm not sure whether it is possible to agree with that. It certainly is not true that everyone's behavior is based on the principle of homo economicus. People sometimes make errors in calculations, behave differently. Certain assumptions perhaps are possible, but most people are much more complicated. It is not easily possible to guess how they will behave. It is possible to guess perhaps what an idealized homo economicus is going to do, but it's not always easy to get it right. Well, now I can see that my time is up. Just to conclude, let me say that over the recent 20 years, game theory was awarded 4 Nobel Prizes in economic sciences and economy, so it looks like it's quite useful and can be used for different types of analysis. Thank you.
Dobrze, dziękuję ślicznie.
Right, thank you very much. And now I think it's time for discussion. Or perhaps there are questions already now. Are there any questions at this moment to our speakers? If not, let us start with some perhaps more general issues. Historic in a way. We were saying that it is possible to compare the way in which we played in the 18th century and in the contemporary world. You said that the games have been with humans from the very beginning, basically, you can say. So now my question, what is your view about the evolution of games in history and culture, what the changes were, what was the importance of games, how were they treated? Is there any, perhaps, period of time that you find especially important, where changes occurred, apart from perhaps the contemporary world?
Ja, ich denke, dass es tatsächlich zwei...
Yes, I think there are in fact 2 big breaking points in the way in which we have been analyzing what games mean for the society in general. So the first one, you might say, was about the change from the aristocratic society to the bourgeois society. When you take a look at such games as getting on the swing, or people covering their eyes and trying to locate the position of something, then the 18th century, I think, changed a lot here. It is at that time that those different social models clashed, aristocracy and bourgeois. Much changed at that time, but at the same time there have been other changes. Also, this process, I think, there are certain erotic issues about the aristocratic society, and Actually, they were no longer considered so erotic in the bourgeois society, where homo economicus features became even more important. Another issue, the digitalization, the 20th and the 21st century, at the end of the 20th, the beginning of the 21st century, we have been able to define more end results. So it's not only about the 16-year-olds, younger people play a lot, women and men play. There is no clear 50-50 division as a result of digitization. Certain mechanisms of game became part of other areas, the economy, the whole labor area, the military. So these are the most important elements that I can see from my perspective. I fundamentally agree with what has been said, no much to be added. Let me just add a few comments about another phenomenon. That's what Michel Foucault says about this epistemological cut, when the symbolic meanings given to human objects, actions, they are given new meanings, more representative meanings perhaps. Games are not metaphors of the ways in which people function in the world, but give us models for certain actions. Like chess, for instance, different meanings can be given to chess, but Ticket to Ride, for instance, cannot be given to so many different meanings. It's about traveling by train, and that's it. There's nothing more to it that is different from chess, perhaps, or yet another small element, but nothing that important.
Also ich glaube, ich sehe tatsächlich nur einen großen.
Well, here in this I can see just one important change. I can even tell you more exactly when it was about this breaking point, breakthrough. It's about the time. In the old days, people had no time to play, and then it changed. Suddenly people started having some free time to play. When people play, they don't make money. People usually spend money playing, and what is even worse, you have to devote your time, and time is money. So actually it's like you spend time twice. First you have to buy a game, and then actually you don't make money, but you play, wasting time as if. And then we moved away from a society in which people had to be focused on a certain objective, when you had to make something, achieve something, and then we created a society in which people are rich enough that they have plenty of free time, and they have to fill this free time somehow. People don't have to work hard from morning till evening, trying to make money for the family, but suddenly people found themselves in a situation in which they have free time. They have to fill this time, and people simply start playing. So for me, this breakthrough, this fundamental change occurred when simply games needed to have certain sense. Military games, for instance, children played war, they had to perhaps do something that might be useful in their lives later, and now we are playing games that are not necessarily sensible, useful for us in any particular way. There are many today who play, and the only reason is that they take pleasure in the games, and there is no additional sense to this. Well, but is this not perhaps a problem for game theory, if we live at the times where we try to maximize profit and optimize time? And this is the key criterion here. So what about game theory here? How would you describe it? Yes, that's quite surprising, actually. I would say it's not a problem, because this is related to what Bernoulli, I think, said. I'm not sure whether there are many people with the same name, but I think we're speaking about the same person. He introduced about what is called Bernoulli's benefit or profit, showing what people try to get, what they try to achieve, and simply people would do anything to achieve their objective. In a mathematical way, where you can think about certain benefits, you all have certain benefit. Now, sitting here and listening, higher or lower profit, but this can be compared to others. It would be different, for instance, if you were to stay at home and watch television or go to your favorite bar. If you have taken the decision to come here, then perhaps there are certain benefits, again, more benefits here related to your presence here than staying at home. You just have to know what it is. Where does it come from, actually? It's not that important, perhaps, if the benefit of being here is very big or not so big. You should know and be able what to do to achieve the best possible result. And being here or making money, there are some benefits generated by our presence here or playing. Where they come from doesn't really matter, I would say.
Muszę jeszcze powtórzyć? Tak, powiedziałem, że to jest strasznie bezdurne.
Can I repeat? I said that it's absolutely soulless and that there's a whole sack of my doubts that are not connected to games, so I'm not going to explain them to you. Right. Now at this moment I would like to ask you a question, a bit concerning optimization, a bit concerning the finding of rules. Jane McGonigal really loves gamers as people, their approach to life, how they can game compete, but I don't understand this charge of soullessness. Of course you deal with games, so you probably find them something absolutely fascinating, but do you believe that this is a great approach, or can gamers really cope better with the world? The mechanisms that they employ, better time management, and this game fighting. Are there dangers, are there threats? Should be the borders imposed? It's difficult for me to imagine that there is somebody who doesn't play at all. Everyone does, to some extent. Some play more, some play less, but those who never play anything, according to Schiller, wouldn't be people. If we look at what Schiller said when he wrote, "A human becomes a human through game." Humanity is now resultant of a game. It's a function of a game, and this calculation which is always present in the game is always somewhat problematic. And I would like to pass this question to Eric Zimmermann. How is it playing five fingers? Somebody who only calculates in games theory. Does he really play? Or is he the one who spoils the game, really? Please tell us.
Someone who does not enjoy but just plays the five in his background, is he really playing, or is he?
Well, I think that the interesting thing about any game is that, as opposed to, I don't want to say as opposed to other works of culture, but I think what distinguishes games as a form of participatory expression or culture, as a cultural form, is that players do things with games. They take the system and they do unexpected things. They'll do many things with it. There's not one proper way to play. And so that you can have, I mean, a game is more like a grammar than an object, right? It's a way of interacting. I think that relates to what Tomasz was saying about Foucault, that it's a sort of a mode of activity. In that sense, one can say that there's a proper way to play outside of what is socially accepted by the group. So we wouldn't want to say that you can't play in a totally rational way, because that form of play then can be played against by other people, sort of intermingling how they want to play. So yeah, it's possible to try and play more like a robot or a computer program or a Homo economicus, but that's sort of part of the palette of possibilities. One time we play that game, it may be more about calculation. Another time it may be more about trying to undermine or change the game. So that's what's exciting about grammar, is not what you're supposed to do with it, but often when you are pushing against the limits of the systems and into new territory. But even that said, you can follow the grammar in a very orthodox way and still, make amazing linguistic statements. Have I answered your question?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I did.
Yes, almost. there's still a problem there, because I think, seen from the outside, you're completely right. You can play as a robot, or you could play as a human being, or as an emotional player. But inside the playing community, something else happens. If you look at EVE Online, and players who play completely rational and have their Excel spreadsheets to maximize their winning chances, they're often hated by the community. Because the community says, well, if you don't have fun, then don't try to focus in this game with having a better Excel.
But aren't they, in being hated, aren't they also playing a role in that community? Right? Because in being hated, they're helping the other players define to them what's proper play. That there's always degrees. They're maybe playing in a way that other players don't like, but they're not as extreme as someone who's hacking into the server and trying to bring down the game for everyone. That would be more of a kind of actually forbidden play, right? That sort of transgresses the spoil sport, as opposed to the more hardcore player.
Well, that's a good point, thanks.
Yeah, two questions here.
Plus, I don't think you can say that the guys with Excel spreadsheet, they're not having fun. I mean, it's not about Excel, it's about domination. There are a couple of types of player personalities, and there are some who play to win, and there are some who play for others to lose, and so on and so on. So they are having fun. They are having fun kicking somebody else's butts, and this is what you said about Bernoulli's costs and Bernoulli's. They are behaving in an economic way, but this is also fun is taken into equation. That's what I think.
I think exactly the same point.
Pleasure is the critique of game theory, I think, because game theory is about ends. No, it's not about ends. But I think that play is about means. It's about enjoying the activity as you're doing it. I know game theory tries to quantify pleasure through utility. But.
Okay, I'll answer you in English so you understand right away. Whatever is fun for you can give you utility. So even the players who sit there with their Excel spreadsheets, maybe that is what they want to do. And you can say many things against game theory, but one thing we always accept is we accept what people want to do. We don't argue with them that your utility is wrong, your utility should be different. We don't say that. We say, okay, you like that. You like kicking other people out of their spaceship in EVE Online, then fine, that's what we accept that you want to do, and we're not questioning that. We're just working from there. We take as given what you want, and we go on from there. We don't ever say, you want the wrong thing.
Dobrze, i tutaj pytanie.
We can also turn this same equation around, or the question around. Just like we can criticize the players who are trying to play perfectly for not having fun, we can also criticize the players who are not playing well enough. Especially in board games, many board games are designed to work in an equilibrium when everyone is somewhat an approximation of a homo economicus. But in practice, when you have someone who is really bad at playing, it can screw the game over for everyone else. So I guess we are ending in a situation where you have to be good enough, but not too good to avoid this critique.
Możemy pociągnąć ten problem.
Can lead this. Should I be speaking English? Okay, let's keep to Polish. Okay. We can go even further with this problem and criticize the whole category of the gamer, player. I'm sorry that I'm so primitive about the question that was asked, but I'll try to address that. This is a social category of a player who would be coping better or more poorly in the game. It is dangerous and unstable. What does it mean that you are a gamer and you are not? If we spread the category of game appropriately, broadly, everyone becomes a gamer because you interact with the outside world and they can bring you benefit. And if we try to look at it more narrowly, as seems to me the intention of your question, to find a special social group which uses very proficiently some mechanisms that are characteristic of a specific type of games, video games in this case, then we gain a dangerous category that stratifies the humanity into those who know how to cope with the rules and who rule the reality, and those who have to cope because they are not proficient enough with those rules. And this seems to me kind of worrying interaction with the concept I'm trying to share with you, that what is happening within the game is not identical with what is happening outside the game. When we are shifting those to the social reality, we're not building a utopia of freedom where every one of us tries to have some power, but the theory of mathematical tyranny with a lunge towards cynicism where benefit begins to play a greater role than the economic benefit, for example, or something less quantifiable. If we imagine life as something that is supposed to bring us measurable benefits, maybe those who use mechanisms of a game are efficient. If we imagine that this is to bring us, I don't know, eternal salvation, something you've got to go through with pain, and then we will find some pleasures in imagined reality. Those who cope better with the game may have less opportunity to enter the paradise. Now, an anecdote. In Eric's game, I was caught in a situation which was a gender problem. I was playing with 4 women as the only man, and you could see it that women were killing each other, and none would be eager to point to me.
To znaczy, nie chcę tutaj wchodzić akurat w tą kategorię
I don't want to enter this category of a player because I believe that this is a difficult subject, and we should probably think whether there is a group of people who define themselves as players or gamers, but this doesn't have to be the full scope of people who play anything. I don't know whether this works well with this panel, but when we look at the people who define themselves as gamers, they put a certain mesh of notions on the world, and they design situations where they are skillful in games within only the ludic realm, and they turn it into their forte. It's a kind of wishful thinking. Yes, you're right, I'm not going to get into this dispute, but we started talking about coping strategies. We have people who, we said, play too well, play very poorly, and also, let's say it straightforwardly, there are plenty of games that focus on interactions with other people, MMOs in the case of video games. Do you believe that one can build a classification that makes sense, approach the game? Bartel did it for MUDs or mods, but do you believe that this can be done, or is it so liquid, so fluent and complicated that no can do? Absolutely, it cannot be encompassed by a network of notions. What, me again? Right. Well, a working concept that I may have, if I kept to what I started with, I should say that you can distinguish those players, gamers, who get reinforced within the game and those who get weakened, whose social situation and subjectivity improves when they sit down to the game. So in their life they must be in a way excluded, and those who have a greater possibility of causing things outside the game. I cannot imagine billionaires, as in the Martin Scorsese's film about Wall Street, that they play a lot in, if online, they have this game life. And that's my idea of division. Those who get empowerment and those who lose empowerment through the game. I heard about a very high-ranking manager who played on 3 computers at the same time and also involved his secretary into World of Warcraft, and his staff did the same. And this is the model that I'm referring to. He used his power to force his people to do the mining for gold, to harvest gold for him. Yes, but this reinforcement, that's interesting. I like very difficult games, for example, or systems that are unobvious. Dark Souls or Demon Souls are the ones where Excel tables are difficult to make. You can't count the algorithms, you had to be very precise. They changed suddenly, you didn't know why. For example, if you used a different weapon, you didn't know what and why is changing. Many people try to research how to study how the system operates. A lot of cooperation online. And I'd say that such a game, Dark Souls or Hexagon, after you leave the computer, it makes me stronger. Not that it gives me imagination, but it frustrates me and makes me learn what is in life. It's not a safe exit or safe escape. And that may be a value. Somebody who approaches a game may be then enriched with certain powers that the world didn't let you use. You really are better, you not only feel better. I have a different question. What about the third category of the gamer? We've got the gamer who gets the empowerment and one who doesn't need it. What about somebody who just gets pure pleasure and doesn't care about winning? He's more into sociology, psychology, being in a group, focusing on a subject. I'm speaking rather about board games than video games, because video games isolate us, and the board games to which we are now returning in a way reteach us some sociological and psychological aspects of being in a group. That's why those game nights are organized in cafes, because they prefer virtual chess and then they go to a kneipe, to a pub where they play with a real person on the other side of the table. These are absolutely the most complicated things. First, somebody who sits down to a board game to feel a part of a community needs some prosthetic community, some kind of axis of the world, axis mundi, which will transform him to a world where he is an element of that community, but so that we don't misunderstand each other. I don't claim that the fact of such a game being isolated beyond the context of life outside the game to be something trivial. No. All this is of absolutely fundamental meaning, and only in this way we can be reborn as people. I'm not criticizing this phenomenon. The same when I'm talking about the prosthetic nature of this society. I'm really captivated by the fact. I'm not really pining over the sad fate of all those sad nerds who haven't got any friends and they must be looking for friends through board games. No, this is a game into a different game. Let's say I want to teach somebody to play chess. I'm not the best chess player, but imagine there's somebody who's poorer than me in chess. Now, I will be playing so that they not always win, but at least they have an illusion that the opportunities are equal. The better player will always remember, if I destroy them during the first game, they will be discouraged. I don't want to destroy. I want to love them, to teach them to love the chess and to play at a different level. I was supposed to say also something else, but that was pure prattle, so good that I didn't add anything more. No, there was one more question. No, I had an idea how to answer it, but I got into this axis mundi so much that I can't now put my finger on a solution that makes sense. But how about somebody else?
Dann übernehme ich das und versuche darauf zu antworten. Also ich finde.
All right. Maybe I will try to manage somehow. I think that certainly there need to be different types of players, different opportunities, ways in which we can realize ourselves in game, when you can experiment with your own self in Foucault's sense. What is a fact is that there is a strange tendency here called verification, where the whole element of game in any human being is reduced to a very narrow model. Certain points are given high score. So this is what I'm really concerned about, that in the social understanding of game, more and more frequently, what starts to dominate is this narrowly understood sense of game and not differentiation of different experiences. Very interesting critique, I must say. Many times it has been, many times people mentioned online games, saying that some perhaps are that good that they treat the games as their profession. But I think there is another area where the games are just average, not too easy, not too difficult. The Five Fingers game that we were given here. If I were to do some thinking, I think you can solve all the possible problems within one afternoon, perhaps. I might say that that's the right way to play it. And if everyone plays in the optimum way, what is going to happen? If the games are too easy, they get boring. 3 wins such a game. It's easy to find the right mathematical solution, and everyone knows what the optimum strategy is, and then it's too easy. Then you end simply because it gets too boring. So, tic-tac-toe, for instance, this game. But there are other games where they are very complex and nobody knows really what is going to happen. People sometimes would like to get some feedback and to know clearly whether they are acting in a good way or perhaps they are playing badly. There have to be some rules, I think, telling people what should be done, who the winner is, who the loser is. But the rules should not be too complex, they should be easily understandable, but they should not be too simple, so that people find solutions straight away. And as for the online games, well, usually they are quite complex, but if there was anyone that good that they are much better than the others and they win a lot of money online, then it might be considered easy. Everyone would copy simply his strategy and everyone would be using the same strategy. Different than in the game guides where step by step you find out what you do, what the others have done. This would be boring, I think. If people, I think, want to make discoveries themselves, this is what we should focus on. In what you have said, I have heard an interesting concept. So it seems that the popularity of games is related to the crisis of big metaphysical systems and certain norms, perhaps. Then the norms tell us what we should do, and then we look for those prosthetic solutions where we find ourselves in the situation in which you described.
Okay, das ist ein großes Thema.
I think this is a very big thing, a big issue. As for metaphysics, I'm not going to go into detail here. But if I were to say something big, I would say, well, let us go back to Marx and say that people in their work move away from concrete success. Those who work with their own hands, they see clearly what they've done, what is good, what is not. And academicians, researchers, those who write articles, it's more difficult to see whether they are successful. They might be successful perhaps a decade later, knowing who read the article, who quoted it. It's more difficult to measure this type of success. So I think there is a need of having games, of playing, where you know usually straight away whether you are successful or not, whether you have won, whether you got the prize, the weapon, the swords, or perhaps you've been killed. So the games simply, I think, are related to certain things that we miss in our everyday life.
Że akademicy powinni być świetnymi graczami.
Well, how would you say? There are certain, yes, those with big needs of successes, seeing that they're successful. But another thing now, It seems that in video games, so-called non-games are more and more popular. So what is typical, title says, The Restaurant Gone Home. The games do not make it clear for us whether we played well. There are no prizes, awards given to us. We just get parts of a fragmented whole, elements of narration perhaps, and what we are going to do with all those different fragments, elements, what kind of story we are going to create. This is up to us. It's not that we are never actually confirmed that we are doing well, that we have guessed something. And those games seem to be quite popular. There's a group of people saying that these are not games at all. This is something that should not be defined as games. But with some people very much into video games, this seems to be quite popular. Let me try to quote Wisława Szymborska, the poet, saying that some like poetry, she said, Szymborska. All right, thank you for this answer. But don't you think that if those games appear, perhaps that we don't really need what we said earlier. We're looking for new experiences. We don't need being awarded straight away. Those prizes are not so important. Well, I think that those games where the rules are not so transparent, with the system of prizes, awards given to the winners, they're closer to what Eric Zimmerman, I think, said as art. In art, actually, you never get a clear prize for what you have understood, perhaps. With art, it's different. There is certain tension, perhaps, something that has to be solved. This is what art is about. So I think those games can be considered, perhaps, forms of art, where the users perhaps like being suspended somewhere without clear feedback. I can just add to what has been said. This is an area of creativity. You are part of art, I would say here, not so much games. If you call these games, I'm not really sure. Games are quite different, I think. It's just art.
What sort of games are you referring to? Because I'm not sure. It sounds a bit like role-playing games, but role-playing games do have like feedback for success. So I'm not sure what sort of games you mean that don't have.
Voyage, vielleicht, the game Voyage.
Voyage, for instance.
The games that have been used by A Tale of Tales, or the Molle Industria games also.
Okay. Yeah, because I think, okay, there's a few examples like that, but I think most games still have some sort of success feedback, even if it's less than other games. So, thank you.
I think it's a very interesting time for us, because I think we've seen a considerable broadening in the concept of game in our time. When SimCity was first released, I'm now guessing late 80s, Will Wright said that this is not a game, this is a toy. And he called it a toy because there are no clear goals. You just build your city and get more money and build it some more. And that was a toy for him. And now I imagine if you show it to people on the street, it's pretty clearly a game. We have also seen this kind of broadening in other areas. For instance, SimCity, Farmville would have not been a game, I think, back in the late 80s. You don't have a goal and you can use your own money to further your progress in the game. But now it's clearly broadening again the scope of what is a game. So I think it's very interesting to see how our very idea of this cultural concept is changing as new products are coming to the market. And of course, this is American progressivist thinking, but I think it's been very visible in my lifetime, at least. And I look forward to seeing what they call games in 2030.
Jeszcze odnosząc się do twojego pytania.
Still referring to the question that has been posed here. the rest or go home, for instance, are the games where the interaction with the surrounding world is very limited, I would say. We explore a certain virtual space and we get some off texts, perhaps, or fragments of notices, messages, and this is it. Or sometimes we get the ready-made world where we cannot do much, we cannot change the world, we can somehow move around and experience something. So this is what I was trying to refer to as the type of games. As for role-playing games, you get the feedback, certainly, I agree. I would say these are not games, but hypertext stories with some interface, a graphic interface.
To już jest trochę kwestia definicyjna, to znaczy...
But this is a matter of definition. What do we call a game? Yes, this is a good question we should pose, perhaps.
Tak.
Please.
Ja spróbuję w takim razie. Challenge accepted.
I will try to accept the challenge. Right, what I wanted to suggest here is to move away perhaps from what I called the essence of game, what is part of the game and what is not. And I think that here in this sense you should think about the definition related to the actions that take, the activities. So game is a certain practice and the certain objects that require certain practice, certain action become games. Whether they were constructed, the idea was whether they should be games or not. That's different perhaps. I'm sorry, I might refer to 19th century, but perhaps the original, some of the ideas, some of the things were not made to be games. Certain objects are used in a different way, perhaps, than the way in which they were created. And some objects, not typical games, can be used for game purposes.
So it's a case of, in your take, it's a case of adding meaning to activities that make those activities games, or adding meaning to certain objects that make those objects a game. So say, I could take a glass off your table and throw it up in the air and see how many times I can rotate it before it falls down into my hand, and that would already be a game. Is that what you're saying?
Mógłby się ze mną założyć, ile razy się obróci.
We could bet, for instance, how many times it will rotate in the air. That might be possible, depending on the meaning you attach to it. Yes, we had this great example, a well-known designer. For instance, our hands. The hands were used for game. So this was done at the beginning. The hands, usually, we don't perceive them as objects for games. Well, in boxing, perhaps, they're used for the game. Not very often, but this is not usually the only way I use my hands for play. I can wave with my hands.
Pytanie się skończyło w takim razie.
Questions at the moment. Are there any more questions at this moment? Right. I think that according to this definition, what I was referring to can be considered games. Well, you don't say that something is a game. Something can sometimes perhaps be a game. If I don't play, for instance, the game that is in my computer, if I never play it, is it really a game if there is no action, no activity related?
Czy chcecie się jakoś...
I still like to refer to what has been said here.
Okay. Dobra, no ale właściwie zbliżamy się do...
Right, we are going to slowly in the direction of the most important questions. Let us try to sum up perhaps here before we move on to questions only from the room. Why do we play? Is it about escaping from the world? If we play something, it is a game, but would you be able to go as far as Heisinger, who says that everything is a game? I don't know how to put it. The Mass in the church might be a game. Would you go that far? Or perhaps this is going really too far. Let us try to sum up perhaps our panel here before there are more questions from the room.
Ich bin mir sicher, dass viele Leute sehr...
Well, I am convinced that many people could conduct a long discussion about definition of the game, but this is not relevant in my view. It's about those who want to write about games, study games. They want to think about definitions, but those who play, I think they don't really care what the definition of game is. I would suggest, therefore, not to take a narrow look at this, just like the economic theory of games. It started with social games, and now it focuses on the behavior of big enterprises. If someone were to say, wait, the definition of the game is such and such, the whole research would be different or not, would not go that far as it happened. But some definitions are for academicians, for researchers. Maybe it's interesting, but it's not interesting for those who play. And I would agree with Tomasz, with what he said, the point he made, that actually using the games, the action, Gebrauch, as Wittgenstein said, so the use of games is different from structures themselves. This is what matters. Again, Erich Zimmermann, I hope that another book will be there. It should not be called The Rules of Play, but The Usage of Plays or Games. This should be the title of his next book. 500 pages. Eric, write such a book for us, please. I would perhaps risk a very banal answer to why we play. We play because we want to, I would say. We want to because perhaps we're missing something, we're looking for something that we don't have, or perhaps we have to because the social situation is such that once we are who we are, we simply have to play certain games. For instance, in the Middle Ages, the princes would have to go hunting, no matter whether the princes liked hunting or not. This was simply required, this was expected. People had to go hunting in the Middle Ages. If they didn't, they were considered quite weird.
To mam wrażenie, że tutaj jesteście...
Right, I think you seem to agree here. Well, it's a pity, perhaps. There was no more disagreement here, but now perhaps there are questions and comments from our conference room. Once we stop talking, I think you will be now more likely to say something. Yes, please. Who would like to ask for the microphone?
I think one thing that makes us play games is not so much to escape reality, but for all the challenge that games can present. We don't really fail. Like, even if there's a game over, even if we lose, there are no consequences in real life. If I screw up in my job, there will be consequences. But if I screw up in a game, I can just start over and try again, and nothing bad will happen to me. And I think that's one of the things that makes games so very attractive.
No dobrze, to jak najbardziej też...
Yes, I agree. Very good comments. Who else would like to make another comment? We can carry on this discussion among the panelists, certainly, but I hope there will be some comments from the other participants as well.
So, the main theme that I'm hearing from all of you is that we should kind of stop seeing play as, even with Eric's initial presentation, what I'm seeing is kind of this tendency of talking about games as more abstract, in more abstract and more broad terms. So it's this step away from these very formal closed systems which we sometimes think games are, especially board games. Well, video games as well. And it's like, do you think that maybe we've come to a point where really creating games in this old manner, in this manner of games as closed systems in which the players can only interact with them in the way that that is prescribed in a way, is this something, a limit that we kind of have to cross, that we have to get rid of that limit to further what games are and what games can be, or is it like two different areas of interests that we should kind of explore both, that we should explore games as closed systems still because there is still ground to cover, but on the other hand we should do stuff outside of that kind of closed thinking about video games? Or is it, or what is it basically? What is the next step? Is it the same thing or is it something else entirely? In game design and game critique.
Beides. Ich glaube, dass man braucht immer neue Spieleideen.
I think that we need new ideas for those closed systems, closed games. Sooner or later, for many, the old rules get boring. You simply know you have to behave to win. You know what the different stories behind games are. They are no longer so important, so catchy, and so you need new games, but they're often done according to old principles, old rules. But from the market perspective, if someone wants to sell a new product that could be called a game, we very often want to reach the people who are creative and are not so fond of clearly set rules. Whether we call it a game or a work of art, this is perhaps marketing, what people are more likely to buy. But I think there is demand for both. This is obvious for me. There will always be people who will be willing to play and others who are more willing to get in contact with different forms of art.
Znowu jesteśmy zgodni.
Again, it seems that we quite agree.
Sobie na swoim polu, czyli sztuki, dodać coś, myślę, że jest pewien problem.
Well, here I think there is a certain problem related to games as art, because it's difficult to collect this type of art. And this, I think, for many interested in art, is very important to be able to collect works of art. So this is an area where I believe that there's no clear solution how to collect this type of art. And I'm not sure we will have a solution very soon, but certainly this develops, this changes. So about how do you understand collecting, collecting for collecting's sake? Or, well, I can show you how big my collection of games is, so there is some sort of collection here. You understood it in a different way, something unique that only you have. Yes, it's difficult to be with witnessing or be able to be comfortable in being the only one who has access to a certain work of art. It's more difficult today in the contemporary world, where you've got so many copies of different works of art. But yes, something that you possess, that you have access to as the only person. It's difficult with games, I think. This type of collection where you purchase perhaps some work of art. As for computer games, yes, I agree, it would be difficult. You have to copy files basically to be able to play a game. But what about some board games, special collector's items, for instance? How do you see these? Perhaps there are 50 copies only, and it might be important for some to be the owner of one copy. This type of collection perhaps is possible. So I could create a board game so that people play it, but I might just have one copy just for my own use. Would you consider myself then a collector here of games? I'm just trying to understand your question, the issue of collecting games. How would you see, perhaps what kind of solutions do you see here? What kind of collection is possible here?
Ja myślę, że ten panel nie temu jest poświęcony, więc...
It seems to me that this is not what the panel is devoted to, but I would like to pay attention to the fact that there's shift from the area of leisure to this experience, which was determined here, saying that there is some tension in art, that something is not solved. I believe that it was said that it's a great definition, and I'd love to have plenty of such mechanics of game that would allow more transcendental experience, and the world that you discussed is really interesting. I'm keeping my fingers crossed so that we go this way, and this aspect of exclusivity must come up, but I believe that there will be a solution soon, so we will be discussing it as if on the margin of our meeting here. I'd like to add a word or two about the art of the game. I deal with both. I'm a designer, and at the same time I'm really keen on designing, especially board games, for a time. And this is a highly specific area, because since 1970s, I believe, Fuchs's conceptualism, neo-conceptualism, when postmodernism entered, the art has been a game with the recipient. Somebody understands something and reaches the moment when a limited number of people play a highly sophisticated game between the artist and the recipient. So when we are entering the subject of collecting games, even board games, there comes a stage that this gets a subtle game with the recipient who gets the nuances and enjoys it. It's not about copies. It's not copying. We no longer have any original in contemporary art. It's more about collecting your own experiences that we materialize on our disc or in our wardrobe. Let me add something that I believe that we understand. We have plenty of different games. Games are both video games and board games, and we also have city games and all the other gaming forms. If we want to collect games, we can collect boxes or games somewhere in a cloud, video games, but I understand that collecting games means really a game being a tool, a box with all it contains, but a city game explains that it is a process that's unique, absolutely different for each player, and those collections come up only in our heads. Thank you. Although possibly with time there will be an opportunity of recording them only for this individual person, I think that if such a process could be recorded, could be made permanent for somebody communing with that work, could be an interesting piece of property. I'm holding on to this property because this is a way of seeing, well, Eric Zimmerman said that we should be snobs, so we should in a way be also collectors, but we throwing all the games into a single pack. No. There are at least two philosophical ways of referring to the game that we didn't mention. Until you said anything, we didn't mention this problem of sense that is moving further away in the process of semiosis. We didn't say that a game is something whose rules we don't know and that we recognize in the process of interaction. That's what Wittgenstein proposes when he speaks of language games. Two immediately come to my mind. I think I've got a third one, but I don't really remember what it is. Right, as we're nearing the end, we've got 3 minutes. Would you like to sum it up in some way, or can we just say our official bye-bye? Last opportunity. To me, games are something that serves my free time, and games theory is my work. It's important that our free time is, our leisurely time is managed how we want to do it. Some force us to do things, it gives joy, but then it's work. As long as there is no enforcement, we can do whatever we want, we like, we call it a game. Let me come back to Wittgenstein and the theory of use, and let me emphasize that we understand games best when we play them and not when we discuss them. So I'd love to start playing all the games that we've got here, and we use the offer of the artists who developed them for us. Okay, that's it.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Very much, and now the break will be 30 minutes long. Upstairs there are some refreshments, coffee and tea, and let's reconvene in 30 minutes.